Welcome to this explainer on the Mothman of Point Pleasant, Legend and Legacy. Today, we're stepping into the deep shadows of one of the most chilling and captivating mysteries in American history. Imagine a small, quiet town suddenly thrust into a 13-month reign of terror by something entirely inexplicable. We're looking at the legend and the legacy of a winged cryptid that haunted the freezing night skies of West Virginia. The story of the Mothman is a terrifying blend of folklore, sudden tragedy, and enduring mystery. Okay, let's dive into this. What actually happens when a monster visits your town? It's a question that sounds like the plot of a late-night horror movie. But for the residents of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, back in the winter of 1966, this wasn't some movie. It was a dark, inescapable reality. What do you do when the bumps in the night step out of the shadows and start staring right back at you with glowing red eyes? Part 1, the first terrifying encounters. To really understand this whole phenomenon, we've got to go back to the very beginning. The date is November 12, 1966. We aren't in Point Pleasant just yet, but in the dark, isolated woods of a nearby town called Clendenin, West Virginia. The sun is down, there's this biting winter chill in the air, and a seriously ominous scene is about to unfold. So picture this. 5 grave diggers are hard at work in a lonely cemetery. Out of nowhere, something massive moves in the dead trees right above them. They look up and report seeing an impossible figure, a massive, brown, human-like creature literally flying silently right over their heads. And the size of this thing? We're talking 7 to 10 feet tall. I mean, just imagine the creeping dread of a creature that large, soaring without a single sound above you in a pitch-black graveyard. It was a sighting that totally set the stage for everything that followed. But the true spark of the legend, the moment the Mothman went from this weird local whisper to an absolute nightmare, that ignited 3 days later on November 15th. 2 young couples were out driving through an incredibly creepy claustrophobic local landmark known as the TNT area. Now, this was an abandoned World War II explosive site. It was choked by thick woods and littered with these empty, hollow concrete domes. Basically, it's exactly the kind of isolated place you would never, ever want your car to break down. So while they're driving through this desolate labyrinth, the couples spot the creature. But this time, it doesn't just fly away. It gives chase. The monster takes to the air and actually begins pursuing their fleeing car. They push the vehicle to 100 miles per hour, which you can imagine they are completely terrified. And yet, this massive winged entity easily kept pace, soaring right above their roof, tracking them from above as they desperately fled the TNT area. Part 2, 13 months of fear. That terrifying chase was really the match in the powder keg. Almost overnight, this one isolated sighting absolutely exploded into a town-wide wave of panic. Point Pleasant was no longer just some sleepy river town. It became ground zero for something deeply, deeply unsettling. And this brilliantly illustrates how the phenomenon rapidly expanded. Over the next 13 months, more than 100 independent witnesses actually came forward. They all reported the exact same entity, a red-eyed monster looming by the desolate roadsides, lurking just outside their homes in the dead of night, and chasing their vehicles. But the strangeness didn't even stop with the creature itself. The town was suddenly plagued by bizarre, unexplained occurrences, including frequent UFO sightings in the night sky. And then came the visitors, these mysterious, intimidating figures that locals started calling the Men in Black. The whole town was just gripped by this suffocating atmosphere of the unknown. The dread just escalated so rapidly. From the gravediggers on November 12th to the terrifying chase 3 days later, the sightings just kept coming. For an entire year, throughout 1966 and late into 1967, the encounters built and built, creating this relentless pressure cooker of fear in Point Pleasant. And this entire bizarre sequence of events was driving violently toward one catastrophic winter day, December 15th, 1967. Part 3, the Silver Bridge Tragedy. At this point, our story has to shift, because the spooky suspense that had blanketed the town for over a year was violently shattered by a very real, somber, and horrifying catastrophe. The climax of the Mothman story isn't some dramatic showdown with a monster. It is a profound human tragedy. On December 15, 1967, right at the height of evening rush hour traffic, the Silver Bridge, which was this vital suspension bridge connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia to Ohio, unexpectedly collapsed. Dozens of vehicles, packed with commuters just heading home for the holidays, plummeted into the freezing, dark waters of the Ohio River down below. During that sudden and catastrophic collapse, 46 people lost their lives. It was just an absolutely devastating blow to this tight-knit community, forever scarring the town of Point Pleasant. But here's the really chilling coincidence that cemented the legend forever. In the immediate aftermath of this profound tragedy, as the town mourned and began to try and pick up the pieces, the Mothman simply vanished. Following the catastrophe of the Silver Bridge, the sightings stopped completely. The abrupt exit of the monster perfectly aligned with the town's greatest disaster. Part 4, Science, Supernatural, or Curse. So, how do we make sense of this? Let's take a breath and transition into an analytical look at the leading explanations. This is humanity's desperate attempts to put a rational label on something terrifying. What exactly happened during those 13 months? Were they dealing with a physical creature, a trick of the mind, or maybe something far older and darker? The attempts to explain the Mothman generally fall into 3 distinct categories. First up, we have the paranormal and cryptid theories. Believers suggest the creature was a supernatural harbinger of doom, maybe a dark prophet warning the town of the impending bridge collapse. Others even argue it could have been extraterrestrial or perhaps a secret military experiment. Right in the middle, we have the skeptical and biological explanations. These point to misidentified large birds, specifically a sandhill crane or an out-of-area owl, combined with the way human vision tends to misinterpret phenomena at night. And finally, the historical and curse theories. Some believers actually tie the entire tragic wave of events, including the bridge collapse, to a long-standing venomous curse uttered by Shawnee Chief Cornstalk way back in 1777. Let's look a little closer at this contrast. The myth versus the mundane. On one hand, you have this terrifying supernatural harbinger with glowing red eyes staring out from the darkness. On the other hand, the leading skeptical explanation proposes something incredibly ordinary, just car headlights reflecting off the eyes of a sandhill crane or a really large owl. But, we shouldn't underestimate how terrifying mass hysteria truly is. The deeply unsettling idea that the frightened human mind can literally invent a towering monster out of an ordinary bird and a trick of the light, all fueled by sensationalized media and a panicked populace. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how science also pushes back against the cryptid theory with the square-cube law. This is a mathematical principle dictating that as a shape grows, its volume and weight grow much faster than its surface area. So, under this law, flight for a bulky 7 to 10 foot tall humanoid is physically impossible. Its wings simply wouldn't be able to generate nearly enough lift to carry its massive body weight. This scientific reality represents a massive clash between the terrifying eyewitness accounts of a soaring monster and the physical mechanics of our actual world. Part 5. The Modern Mothman Legacy. The sightings stopped, the bridge fell, and the scientific debates raged right on. But what actually happened to the town? We move now to how Point Pleasant processed, adapted to, and ultimately embraced this incredibly bizarre chapter of their history. Because they didn't bury the terrifying story. Instead, they built a completely new identity around it. Point Pleasant leaned entirely into the legend, transforming it into a massive pop culture phenomenon. The story went global thanks to author John Keel's famous 1975 book, The Mothman Prophecies, which was later adapted into a 2002 Hollywood film starring Richard Gere. But the town itself is the real monument here. Today, Point Pleasant is home to the world's only Mothman Museum. And in a bit of a touch of dark irony, standing proudly right in the center of town is a menacing 12-foot stainless steel statue of the cryptid sculpted by local artist Bob Roach. They took the very thing that terrorized them and quite literally put it on a pedestal. And let me tell you, that statue does not get lonely. Every single September, tens of thousands of tourists flock to Point Pleasant. They come from all over the world for the annual Mothman Festival, happily taking to the streets to celebrate the town's most famous red-eyed harbinger. It has become a vibrant, thriving, and honestly oddly upbeat community event born from a deeply dark and mysterious past. Which leaves us with one final lingering question to consider. As you look at the evidence, the timelines, and the profound tragedy that ended it all, what really visited Point Pleasant in the winter of 1966? Are we looking at a physical monster that defies the laws of physics, a centuries-old curse fulfilling its dark promise, or simply the terrifying, runaway power of the human mind gripped by mass hysteria? Well, whatever the truth may be, the Mothman remains watching and waiting in the shadows of history.